This is the Lotus Bloom Podcast. And here is your host, Morgan Wiley.
Welcome to another episode of the Lotus Bloom Podcast. I'm your host, Morgan Wiley. First up, I just want to say thank you to all of our first responders, medical staff, those still working in essential services. Your service and sacrifice does not go unnoticed, and I just wanted to say thank you. Today, I'm excited to bring you an interview where I'm bringing back a special featured guest. Nicole Allen will be with us again, and she's going to talk about all things Enneagram because it's always a good time to learn more about ourselves and how we respond to other people and how we all see the world differently. I also have a surprise guest, and you'll get to hear from her as well. We're going to get this show on the road, but before we do, I just want to mention a couple things. We wanted to bring this information to you so bad that we tried doing this interview maybe 4 or 5 times. I think with so many people working from home now, and let's be honest, all of the Netflix binging and the like, I was having some internet trouble, and so it kept dropping our calls, and we struggled to get this put together, but we persevered and we did it, and I'm excited for you to get the information. But that said, please forgive some of the technical issues and the sound quality issues. At one point, it sounds like I disappear, and to be honest, I did. I got dropped, but I wanted Nicole to keep sharing the information, and so I popped back in at some point. So just roll with it, and I hope that you can really hear the heart of the conversation and gain the knowledge and hopefully learn something about yourself and learn a little bit about me and my co-host as well. So without further ado, here's the interview. I'd like to welcome Nicole Allen back to the show. If any of you have been following along, we got to hear about Nicole's creative journey to becoming a hairstylist back in episode 4. And we had mentioned that Nicole has a passion for learning about the Enneagram. And this is something that was very big in her life as she's been on the road of self-discovery and growing. And so she is coming back today on the show as our resident expert in all things Enneagram. So welcome back, Nicole.
Yay, thank you. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm excited too, get to learn more about this. And I'm super thrilled that today we're doing something a little bit different. Another friend of mine who is also interested in learning about this had an idea that maybe we could do a show together. So I'd like to introduce to you a friend of mine who you may also know from her past blog, Improperly Forward, and currently her own podcast, Everything's Not Fine. Welcome to the show, Keli Budinich.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited you're here.
Me too.
She is going to play our guest host today, so I'm super excited. Kel, feel free, jump in, ask your questions. We're going to just have fun.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, so Nicole, when I first heard about the Enneagram, my first reaction was, oh God, not another personality test. So my past experiences with them have not been great. I've taken many different tests, and my frustration with all of them has been, well, there's 4 boxes you can fit in, or, you need to be this certain thing. And I just didn't test well, or I never could find where I fit in those tests, whether it be, the sanguine, melancholy, choleric, phlegmatic tests, or the Briggs-Myers, or there's a multitude of tests out there. And so I was always frustrated. And I don't know, Kel, how you feel about this, but I was like, yeah, no, I'm okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So then I've been hearing different people talk about it. And Nicole, you especially, you've been talking more about it. And as friends, you're like, you really might want to look into this, and directed me toward a book that is called The Road Back to You by Ian Morgan Cron and Suzanne Stabile. I might be saying those wrong.
Oh, you're right.
So I've been reading that, and as I've been getting into it, I've been fascinated to learn more about it. And so I'm super excited for you to be able to share with us. So why don't we just start very basic? What is the Enneagram?
Yeah. So Morgan, as you and Keli both know, it's definitely been my same experience. Like you were saying, previous stuff where you take a test and you feel like, cool, that's good information. And it just sort of felt like sometimes being put on to me rather than like, okay, what do I do with this now? Like, you're bossy or you're emotional or whatever.
Right, you're like, thanks, I knew that.
Cool. Thanks for that. So for me, the Enneagram became kind of a whole different experience because the whole thing with it is it talks about our motivations rather than just our behaviors. And within our motivations, it's also like a big tenet of it is sort of what's best about us can also be what's worst about us, which to me just rings true. So the Enneagram's a personality typing system based on our motivations of why we do what we do. With what I love about that is that it also is talking about ways that we can grow as people. So it's not just about behavior modification, but really about kind of learning more about ourselves and why we have knee-jerk reactions that we do. And then being able to kind of examine that with care and kindness towards ourselves, first of all, but then in ways that we can understand that like, oh, not everybody sees the world the way I do. And that's kind of what I think is so different about it. It's about like understanding and realizing how very differently so many of us are. And none of it is bad. It's just different. And until we recognize that we don't all see the world the same way, I think we run into a lot of communication issues with everyone else around us.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so the Enneagram is based sort of generally saying there's 9 distinct ways of seeing the world. And it's a tool for us to learn how to learn ourselves and learn others and have empathy, again, first for ourselves. And then it really does sort of naturally bring an empathy towards others because we see how much people are carrying, or their own sort of internal struggle. And we can have more kindness for others in that, which I just think is cool.
Yeah.
Very cool.
One of the things that you first said, Nicole, when you started talking about the Enneagram on your Instagram stories and the lives that you've done was that was so impactful to me is that sometimes, and I think you have the source for this, I don't, I'm sure, but something along the lines of when we get to the second half of our life, what carried us through the first half doesn't necessarily, we feel that need to kind of discover more and to get us through the second half of our life, which is exactly where I am. And what really pulled me like, oh, this is like some of this self-discovery that I'm going through. This is what I need for right now. So
That's good.
That to me go along with what you're saying is that was the thing that I was like, I got to do this. Like this, I need to learn more.
Yeah. And that's what same for me was like, okay, so it's the whole tenet. It's where I heard it first was with Richard Rohr, who's a Franciscan monk actually, but he was saying that same idea, right? Like what got us to this first half, through this first half, these skill sets and these sort of self-protective measures and all of these things that carried us through and got us here, start to wear thin, and they just aren't working the way that they did back before. And so it does sort of brings, to me at least, it's brought a natural need for growth and to kind of re-examine those things and either grow in those skill sets or be able to like let some of those things go for new, fresh, life-giving skills for the second half of life. So it's been what's been really helpful for me.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So question, I mean, let's pretend I know nothing. And just based on what you're saying, does that mean our personalities are changing as we get older? Or how does what you're saying with the skill sets, how does that fit in with our personalities from, as younger people and then growing more mature with those?
Sure. So for me, I see it, it's kind of the difference between how I've seen other personality tests too. A lot of people will say, well, don't put me in a box, right? That's what it feels like. You're being told what box you fit in.
Yeah.
And the Enneagram, in perspective, it almost flips that on its end and says, the Enneagram isn't a box you're being put into. It illuminates the box you are already in.
Okay.
And then ways and tools on how to get out of that. So I think when we're born, we have just sort of skill sets, knee-jerk reactions, hardware that are built into us, ways that we see the world and ways we react to it. With maturity, I believe it's not at all that we change personalities, because we can't change how we see, but we can change what we do with what we see.
Good.
And that's where I feel like that maturity, you get to a point where you just want to grow more as a person. So it's about acknowledging, I do always do X, Y, and Z. And I keep getting the same stupid result with those actions. And I don't want to keep being stuck there. And so what is it in me that maybe I can take a look at and acknowledge that maybe I have some things that I can grow in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of specific examples.
Well, I think that's helpful. I mean, maybe even as we go, if you think of examples as, we just throw those out there.
Yeah.
Kel, do you have any other questions before we start diving into the types?
No, I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay, Nicole, bring it on. What are the types and what do they mean?
Sure. Okay, so there's 9 different basic types. I do want to say this, that we are all 3-dimensional people. So there's going to be little bits and pieces that we all relate to, but we're all kind of drawn individually towards our own specific type. And we're all going to have our own flavor to that. So it's not that everyone's exactly the same. Not everything is going to fit, but it's about what sort of the majority feels like, oh yeah, no, that's me. So this is a very brief overview.
Okay.
But our ones, and they're just numbered. It could be anything, but so there's not greater or lesser personalities. It's just a distinguishing factor. But in general, our ones are known as our perfectionists or reformers. These are people that are most known by their inner critic and their need to be perfect and seek perfection. A lot of times they want to seek perfection so that they don't have any room for anyone else to criticize them. So it can be like a very protective measure to do it all right. There are rule followers. They definitely, if they're putting something together, they want to do each step exactly how it's done. And if we're missing a piece, we're going to stop what we're doing. We're going to find that piece, whether it's call a company or whatever. These are people that also struggle because they're so inner critical. They really struggle with objectivity in themselves, in their own thinking. So they are highly critical to themselves. That can turn outward as well. But that's where it's almost like they just lack that objectivity to say, wait, I did the best I could. Instead, it's just, you never did enough. No matter how hard you work, it's not enough. They are also, in a positive way, they're also the ones that are able to help us find ways to improve on things, whether it's a project or a system. They are the ones that really naturally can see ways that it could be improved to make it better. These are also our present time people. So they are very good with the here and now. Now is when it can be done. Now is when we're going to take care of it. They're not necessarily super thinking ahead. They're very planning, but they're not necessarily like way out there in the future. They really kind of do a better job right here and now. Then we move on to our twos, which is known as the helper or befriender. These are our very nurturing, naturally caring people. These are people that want to help. If you have a need, they want to meet it. They have a need to be needed. They also struggle with boundaries because of that. So if they've got something going on, but someone else expresses a need, they're the ones quickest to drop what they're doing for themselves and go to help the other person. Obviously that has pretty obvious like pros and cons. The pros, obviously, they're really helpful and caring and thinking about other people. The con is that they struggle to take care of themselves at times because everyone else takes precedence. These are our people that definitely are thinking a majority of time about their relationships. So they can kind of get almost a little obsessive in their mind, thinking about people and all of that, when it's really healthy for them to ask themselves, is this mine to do? That's a really healthy thing to kind of bring themselves back to. Is this actually my responsibility? Is this mine to fill in the gap? Or, even if I see it, is this not mine to do? So that's our twos. Then our threes are known as the achiever or the performer. These are our success-oriented friends. They're probably the most type A. They are more aggressive in nature, confident, willing to stand on their own. They want to be successful, or they, at very least, they will be satisfied at least appearing as successful. So they definitely tend to be our glass half full peeps. They will spin even failure into success. They are definitely the ones to kind of spin negative into like, but here's how we're going to grow. They also are ones that read the room really strongly. So they're really quick to want to give you what you want. If that means kind of morphing a little bit personally to fit your needs, they will do that. So then we're on to fours, which is known as the individualist or the romantic. And our fours are definitely ones that have all the feels. They can tend towards being pretty moody. They have so many emotions kind of coming at them all day. They don't always know which one to go with. But these are our friends that are also, obviously, they're very creative. They are also very comfortable in sort of the bottom half of emotion. So they can definitely have a penchant towards melancholy and all of that. They also experience an inner critic, and I don't think it's as much about being perfect or doing everything just so perfectly, but it definitely seems to be much more personal and like attacking just the individual. But they are ones that struggle sometimes with the doing. So they're real good starters of projects, very creative, excited, but they can definitely struggle to like finish a project. And they also tend to have sort of a general sense of feeling like they're missing something, like everybody else is possessing this sort of unnamed quality that they feel like somehow they just don't have, which is really challenging. Like that's, and actually I have a lot of empathy for, because that would just be such a challenge. But that's our fours.
I'm going to just interrupt you for a minute. I have a question about the titles of these or the names of these numbers. Why is the romantic the same as the individualist? To me, they don't seem to be the same thing, but
Yeah. So I don't know who named them, but I do know that it's just alternate names, but the romantic fits the fours because, again, they're so emotional and creative that think of like sort of that picturesque, super romantic, like, here's all the ways I love you. Let me sing you a song to tell you, or the like, these are also, and I have close friends that will do this. I'm having a hard time. Read this poem. It tells you how I feel. So it's just sort of that very emotionally connected, expressive kind of picture. So it's just sort of another aspect, I think, of that four.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Good. I am not that friend, in case you were wondering.
I am not either.
Me neither. And then, funny enough, when we switch to the five, it's like it takes a hard left turn. So the 5 is called the investigator. And these are our friends that are very different than the 4. They're very logical. They're really good observers and listeners. These are people that are very aware of their own limited amount of energy. So they have sort of just a solid amount of energy every day, and that's all they get. So because they are aware of that within themselves, they like to plan and know what's ahead because they want to make sure they're conserving enough energy for it. So these are not our big party people. These definitely are people that prefer certainly a lot of alone time, but also that prefer much more of the one-on-one or a very small group. They're called the investigator because they definitely have a need for knowledge. So it can be really deep things, or it can just be like, I wonder how my VCR worked back in the day. And like, they can sort of get super random example, but they can get really lost down like their rabbit hole. So these, we all have been known to get stuck on Pinterest for like way longer than we meant. But these are people that can like, holy crap, like 10 hours later. Sorry, I was trying to be family.
Good save.
Yeah. So anyway, they're funny that way. They definitely want to know what they're talking about. They will do tons of research before making a decision. What's cool is once they've done the research and they come to a decision, they do really trust themselves, which is a big marker for them compared to some other types, because they've really exhaustively like gotten all the knowledge that they can. So they feel confident when they do make a decision. So they don't come to decisions quickly, but once they do, they feel good about them and confident in them.
Huh. I am not that either.
Yeah. Me neither.
So when you say they know this about themselves, that they have a limited amount of energy to give any one day, like if this is not a person who's aware of the Enneagram, or they're not a very self-aware person, like how does that come out? Like they're just more of an introvert, and so maybe their gut just does this automatically.
Yes.
They limit their output or whatever, but they don't know why. They just
right. So mostly in the same ways that I can relate in other ways, I think that it's like how they've operated without having words to define it. So I know some that have just said, I'd prefer observing. I definitely feel exhausted with big groups. I just, I feel really aware that I'm just more tired. I'm more introverted. I need more alone time. Like, I think those are things under other definitions that people tend to know about themselves. If they don't have those words, they've certainly felt it.
Yeah.
So I do that. Okay. So then, and maybe this is a question we can answer later, but I'm curious then how the introvert extrovert plays into these.
Yeah.
If, can you be an introvert and, any of the numbers, or is it kind of more leaned towards certain ones?
So I certainly think that there is a pension, but I think that you could be an introvert or an extrovert in any of these numbers.
Okay.
And that's part of what makes it interesting and what also keeps it from being like, you're all robots. If you're this number, you're all exactly the same. Like, like totally we're not, and it's what kind of gives everyone their own flavor.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so that's our 5 anyway.
Okay.
If we go on to our 6s, they are called the loyalist. And the most important for 6s is they want to feel secure. So these are definitely our friends that tend towards always kind of viewing the world in a somewhat anxious and worst case scenario thinking. So they're the ones that go into new scenarios and go, hold on, let's make sure we're taking, what's safe, what's not. Let's be really careful. I had just heard somebody recently, my daughter and her friend were talking, and her friend identifies this way. And she said, I am leery of people, and I believe you are guilty until proven innocent. It's her perspective. And it was funny because I think that's about that, like, yeah, we'll see, until you prove yourself, sort of. And that's a little bit part of that personality type. My daughter was laughing because she's completely on the opposite end. She's like, you are innocent until proven guilty. They're a good balance for each other. But yeah, these are definitely people that really have a hard time making decisions because unlike the 5s, they will keep questioning and questioning and questioning and kind of keep hemming and hawing over the same thing and just really struggle to actually trust themselves ever or trust their decision. They're kind of always second guessing. And again, it's always with that in service to wanting security am I sure that's the best decision? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I need to get more information. And they just kind of can get stuck sometimes in that little bit of hamster wheel of fear and anxiety and just kind of go over and over. I did hear a funny story about 6s, though, that also shows their worth and value to us as a whole. There was a group of scientists studying a family grouping of apes in the jungle. And they took all of the apes that had awareness, almost like hyper awareness to the other, like they'd always be on the lookout for predators and ones that just seemed more sort of like anxious. And they decided to separate them out from the group. And so they pulled those apes away from that family grouping and they let that family go for a whole year without those particular apes. And when they went back to check on the family grouping, they all had died.
Oh,
which sounds so terrible. But I think what it proves is that we actually do need the people in our lives that have that awareness to danger because, and have some awareness of like, we should think about that. Let's consider being more cautious. Like if everyone was all the same, like, we probably wouldn't survive as a species. So
interesting. Yeah.
Isn't that kind of fascinating? I just think that's such a good reminder not to, for those that aren't 6s, sometimes I can speak for myself. It can be a little frustrating if someone is, highly just kind of anxious all the time or always seeing the like, oh, I don't think we should do that. I'm like, oh my God. But
live a little.
Yes, exactly. Let go, man. They do have some points. And especially with the situation, of course, we find ourselves in now, these are our people that are saying, no, don't get together with your friends. Like, stay home. Do some of these basic things. And that can really help us all. So they certainly have their value.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Again, with a sharp right turn, we go on to our 7s, who are called the enthusiasts. And these are, again, a more aggressive, forthright personality. They, like their name, They like fun and they like to have a good time. They're definitely more adventure seekers. They are not always comfortable. They don't really prefer to sit and talk about our feelings. They really they're good with the top half of feelings. They're good with the joy and the fun and the funny. They tend to want to kind of always make things lighthearted, which again has its gifting. But sometimes if they have feelings that are maybe not a part of that, they have some more melancholy or true grief or struggling, they can almost get a little frantically busying themselves on trying to distract from feeling maybe what they are kind of going through.
Yeah.
These are definitely ones that have that general sense, if a little is good, a lot is better. So they're what I've come to call with a friend of mine, the crab add-ons. So let's go out to dinner, let's have steak, definitely get the crab add-on, the party platter, why would you do less? And they are also the ones that you're at the fun thing and they are wanting to plan the next fun thing. Sometimes they can struggle to also get nailed down. Like if you're talking about a party that you're going to have or hey, we should go do this. They'll be like, yeah, that sounds fun sometime. And you'll be like, well, how about next Wednesday? And they'll be like, well, we'll see. Which sometimes is because if they've committed and they're locked in, what if something more fun comes along? Then they're missing the more fun thing.
Right.
Huh.
So, they're just funny like that. So, and of course, there's less healthy versions and more healthy versions. Certainly as our 7s grow and become to more of that midlife, they get a little more comfortable with their feelings and with themselves and can be happy, in what they're doing. But I think it takes some intentionality with that too.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so then we could actually move on to 8s, also known as the challenger.
Well, I'm an 8, and I would like to say that you're such a brat.
You a challenger?
8s are people too, okay?
That's right. 8s have feelings. They're just shoved down.
We have feelings, and we're good people.
Yes, you are. Please proceed.
Yes. So our 8s are definitely, they're in that aggressive stance. So they're confident to stand independently. They are definitely ones that experience anger sort of in its true form. If they're ticked and they will let you know it. They definitely, it's almost like their go-to emotion. And oftentimes we have to remind our 8s that anger is not the only emotion. And
That's really rude. They're all rude things that you're saying.
Rude. But they are also our awesome advocates. So they are the ones that will stand up for the underdog. They are lovers of justice. And if you have an 8 as a parent or a spouse, you are in good hands because they will definitely speak for those that need that and need that advocate voice, because they're not gonna be pushed around. So they have a lot of value and benefit for sure. 8s are also very future oriented, so they're definitely much more comfortable thinking about what's up ahead, and kind of looking to that and not so much dealing with the right now or the past. That's a little more uncomfortable for them typically. They definitely, with the feelings as our other aggressive stance numbers, their feelings repressed. So again, most comfortable feeling they are in is experiencing anger first, and sort of that passionate exchange brings a sense of closeness a lot of times with those 8s, like they've had a good tussle and they feel closer to that person, which is not always everyone else's experience, but that can be for them.
True.
That's interesting, huh?
Yeah. Sorry.
The only other one that I would say, no, you're good. The only other one I would say is that for 8s, because they are They are good leaders. They're happy to lead. They're pretty confident that they could do it better. They don't have to always be in the lead position, but if they aren't, they just don't want to be controlled by someone else. So they don't have to be in control of the group, but they don't want anybody else in control of them. And then relationally with eights, the struggle can definitely be that they're kind of always on the lookout for betrayal. And so, and it's just kind of a natural tendency. And so eights don't tend to have a huge group of really close friends. They'll definitely have lots of people in their life, but as far as the ones that they confide in or have vulnerable times with, that's a lot harder for our eights. And so understanding that and giving them room for that and asking again with our feelings repressed, how are you feeling? What does that make you feel like? That would be hard, and especially if anger comes first, that's okay. Don't let it push you off, but kind of explore some of that. If you are a closer, spouse or somebody, close friend, that can be a helpful tool for loving our eights.
Quick question. So you said that they tend toward looking for betrayal, but so that doesn't have to come out of a past necessarily of distrust. It could just be their natural tendency. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So they're just because that they're so quick, they're quick-minded. So if you've crossed them or if there's something that they view and it's their perspective of being betrayed or talked against or something, that's sort of just a natural like knee-jerk reaction is to like, it's betrayal, you're done. And it's really tough when you've been fully cut off to ever fully regain. I do believe it's totally possible, but it's not without a lot of intentionality on the part of the eight and a lot of intentionality and care and pursuit on the other party's part. So, I certainly, when you've experienced betrayal and you've experienced things, it's definitely, also helps and makes it easier to assume betrayal. But for our eights, it's definitely a little bit more of a natural assumption, whereas, maybe others would see it as, no, they were just a jerk and they screwed up, or they were selfish. Like for the eights, it can feel like a betrayal.
Like it jumps to an extreme, kind of.
Yes.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our challenger in a sum. And then we're on to nines, the peacemaker.
Okay, this is me, I think.
Yes. Which Morgan was resistant to the peacemaker term.
Yes.
So we also call it the bridge builder.
See, I can handle the bridge builder. I don't know why I have an issue with being a peacemaker.
Yeah. So I think the thing to me with the nines to think about in that peacemaker sort of defines it as like, to me, that they want to keep the peace within. So nines have sort of two layers. They have like an internal peace they want to maintain, and then they have external peace that they also want to maintain, like no conflict. Obviously, conflict avoidant is sort of the biggest part of that.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, please.
Yeah. And in service of that piece, they have a natural ability to see perspectives from everyone else's perspective. So you are really good at being able to like hear people's opinions and go, okay, I can see that. That makes sense. And then hear someone else's sort of contrary, and you can see where they're coming from with that too. So always the ability to play the devil's advocate, which is a beautiful gift. It can make making decisions challenging because you can always see the other side. And so that can be part of what is so difficult when it comes down to like actually making a decision for our nines, because there's too many voices, like too many sides, too many possible ways. And, and again, in service to not wanting to cause conflict. So sometimes you can feel almost a little hostage to like, I don't want anybody to be mad. I want it to work for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Also, nines they are on the doing repressed side of things. So the law of motion, which I find so fascinating, but so true with our nines, it's the law of motion. If they've stopped doing, it's super hard to get started. But once they get started, and sometimes they need a little bit of help to get started but once they do, man, they're like the train engine that just keeps chugging along. Like they can go and go and go and go. It's pretty
That's
amazing.
cool. Do you see
Yeah.
that, Morg? Do you see that in yourself?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm curious, and I think this will lead into the next part, but I'm curious how the wings influence these different things also. But yeah, I do. Sometimes I have a really hard time getting going. Especially if I feel overwhelmed by a project, or I will probably do all kinds of little dumb things that I can feel accomplished with just so I don't start that one.
So that's a perfect example of the doing repressed, because it doesn't mean you don't do anything. It's just so easy to do the unproductive things rather than the thing that needs to be done. And sometimes I think it's also hard for nines to differentiate what's more important. Like I know, so Aaron my husband is a 9, and actually so is my daughter. And she was just saying the same thing. Like she's so easily distracted, and it's really hard for her to differentiate like what's most important. So they can kind of fixate on the new, we call it shiny syndrome at our house.
Yeah.
So she can fixate over on one thing, and then you're like, okay, but that's still not the priority. Let's come back to what needs to be done and then go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
So that can be sometimes the challenge. The only other thing, well, there's two things else I wanted to mention about the nines before we move on, which is nines definitely are still in that anger triad. So they experience anger, but nines tend to be the ones that shove that anger down. So if they feel it, they want to shove it down because they don't want to deal with it. So most typically it will come out a little bit sideways and more in that like passive aggressive kind of way rather than in a straightforward kind of way. And I will say it also, maturity brings some of those things up where, by the time we're the age we are, we're better at that. We're better at addressing like, okay, that really bothered me. I need to go back. But it's definitely a natural tendency to shove down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then the only other one I wanted to mention is that because nines are so focused on those two layers of peace, it's again with that distractibility, it's really common for nines to kind of get off while they're in a conversation, get off track on a rabbit trail in their own mind, and suddenly discover that they haven't really heard what's been happening in the conversation, and they have a really good autopilot response like, oh, yeah, totally. But
I am now also a 9. I've decided I'm switching.
So that leads to our wings, which when Morgan asked about the wings, so wings are what other things we have access to, but you only have access to the numbers that directly like are on either side of your number. So an 8 would have either a 7 wing or a 9 wing. So it's very possible, Kel, that you may have some of those habits.
Yeah.
And
Can
then
you do both?
You can, especially as we get into middle age and beyond. Typically, in our earlier years, we tend to only have one side that we're more in than the other. And it's certainly to varying degrees. So some have just a little bit and others have quite a heavy wing. The one thing I think that's important to remember is that our wings the wing is only about our behaviors. It's not how we're motivated. We are still only motivated by our number, but we definitely have access to those tendencies as far as some of those behaviors or actions.
So that does, let me ask you a question to see if it does make sense. So this is something I see that I will, as a challenger, one thing that I see myself doing a lot is like acting as a peacemaker or a bridge builder, but doing it in a way that a challenger would do it. Like my motivation I don't know. I'm wanting to find a way to build a bridge, but it comes out in a way that is not going to build a bridge.
Yeah. So Erin,
you are going to build this bridge and you're going to build it right now.
Everybody get on the bridge. No.
Yes. It totally makes sense because I think you see, and it's whether it's adulthood or whatever, but like balance says, okay, we need to work together, but there's still going to be that a little bit more forcefulness because that's still just your natural tendency. So Aaron's the opposite of you. He's a 9 with an 8 wing. And so he will occasionally, like we were laughing not too long ago, he got himself into where he had been definitely doing the passive aggressive, shove all the anger down. And then of course it comes to a head and it just like explodes. And literally he was so like, he was almost crumpled on the ground afterward because he's like, he felt horrible. Like it's a quick explosion. And then it's like, okay, I'm done. But then he's like, the friggin' 8 wing is making me have to do so much work because like I just exploded all over and now it's going to take me weeks to undo this like meanness or whatever, like aggressive. And so he's like so conflicted, poor guy.
That's cute.
Oh, that's funny.
And so I think it can be similar on the other way around for you, probably, Kel, is where you can experience that. Definitely it's more forceful, but also like, wait, let's work together.
Yes. Yeah. It feels, it's very interesting because I don't know if everybody, I mean, Nicole, what number are you, Nicole?
I'm a 3.
A 3. So you are,
I'm in the aggressive stance. Yeah.
Yes. It feels weird to me that my 8 tendencies are so conflicting with what I picture a 9 to be. Like that seems very strange to me.
So it's one of the hardest combinations is that 8 with a 9 or 9 with an 8 because they are so opposite. It is sort of that inner conflict can be so strong.
Yeah.
At times because of that, just because they are so very different.
Yeah. So like for Morg, she's a 9. There's no 10. So what would her...
We'll go back to the 1.
Yeah, good question.
Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, that is a good question. So it's a circle and 9 is at the top. And so hers would be either an 8 or a 1. And remember that 1 is that more perfectionistic, more systems oriented, more a little bit more black and white thinking, definitely, orderly and just kind of see how we can, do it right. And
so which would you think I tend towards?
1. There's no question.
Yeah, I would have to say,
well, tell me what you really think there, Challenger.
Nicole may be the expert, but I'm saying you're a 1.
No, I see, because so for me, I still want to be liked. So I'm like, how do I say this nicely? Yes. So I would say a 1 probably is your pension.
Okay, well, that's kind of what I was leaning towards thinking. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. All great qualities.
They
Absolutely.
are.
And
then
the beautiful part,
positives in it, which some numbers, it seems to me, it's a little harder to find, like for an 8, for an example, it's harder to put a positive spin on some of those things. But it's necessary.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. And each type really does have their strong suit. And it still comes back to the same thing. What's best about us can be what's worst about us. Yeah. So it's like two sides of the same coin, right? Like the advocate, it takes that ability to stand independently and be forceful to get stuff done. Like sometimes that's the only way you're going to actually be heard and have someone look at things and really deal. So it takes those qualities to be a good advocate.
Yeah.
And yet it can be, both sides can be, challenging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me, like, everybody has their beliefs or opinions about
Mhm.
how we're created or whatever, but like I have kids who have special needs or extra needs. So it is like one of the most important qualities I have as a mom is for my kids is to be an advocate for them.
Yes.
And so it's just amazing to me. I was born this person way before I have my kids, but I have that ability that they so desperately need, which I think is incredible.
Hmm. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's very true. It's pretty cool when you start thinking about that.
Even Mark's qualities as a 7 and as a 1 are so necessary for the things that you do in your life and the gifts that you have. I mean, we can say one came, which one came first, but they play such a huge part in the path that our life takes. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is. And I think looking at the whole picture and, especially with like you used, parenting, but in relationships, in friendships, our work environment, all these
Yeah.
places, if we can have more of an understanding of ourselves, but of the people around us, and to have grace to allow people to be who they are, now if somebody's being a jerk, you can't just excuse and say, "Oh, they're just being an 8 right now."
No, right.
We all need to grow and find
Yeah.
our better qualities. But I just think it's really cool to see that whole picture. It's neat.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole thing, right? It's not an excuse for bad behavior, but it is helpful to understand, oh, you actually see the world completely differently than I do. And so not only can I have room for that, but I also can learn and grow from that and maybe have better perspective on like, gosh, if that's how you see the world, then this experience that we both had interaction together probably came off so differently. And, whether, especially if there is some kind of a conflict or something, like it's helped me so much depending on who I'm talking to understand like, oh, maybe that's why they shut down, right? Maybe that's why I'm like not hearing anything from them. And so to be able in relationships, especially closer relationships, to go back and say, okay, I am, sometimes it's, I'm sorry. Sometimes it's, how did that make you feel? Because I want you to know my intention was this, but I could also see where maybe that made you feel shut down or whatever. And so for us, aggressive numbers to be able to have more self-awareness and go, okay, like I need to check myself and maybe listen. And then the other is to be able to say, for like the Morgans, to be able to go, okay, don't take their passion personally. Like as much as you can mentally, to be able to say like, okay, she's feeling passionate. I need to not take this personal because in this moment, it's not actually personal.
Right. Stephen and I were having a conversation about some of this stuff, and I just found it so interesting, and one for myself, to learn that there's not something wrong with me, but that other people experience these same characteristics of a 9. And so I was sharing with him how he's, I don't remember which number he is, but he's in one of the aggressive stances. And when he talks, he's very impassioned and it gets louder and the tone is strong. And I'm like, stop yelling at me. But it's not at me. It's not personal. But to me, it's like everything gets louder. And apparently that's a 9 thing. And I didn't realize that. So it's like interesting.
Absolutely, which is so helpful. Aaron and I consistently have that conversation now, where there's all sorts of things. He's so quick to like, oh, wouldn't that be cool? We should go on this trip. Oh, we should do this on our house. Oh, we should whatever. And he's just like, he sees it, he says it, it's just an idea. And he literally is not attached to them. It's just like, wouldn't that be cool? We should. And I go into go do mode. So I'm like, oh my God, now he wants to do that. How am I supposed to make that happen? Like I immediately am like trying to figure out how to make it happen. And he's going to be really mad if I can't figure it out. And like, he has all this expectation. And then, I'm like way down this trail and he's like, what just happened? Down. And it's been so helpful to understand that about each other. that there's just sort of those tendencies. And so to be able to, whether it's for him to preface, hey, I'm just spitballing, I just thought someday,
Yeah.
or for me to say, okay, when you say that, do you want me to figure out how I'm supposed to do that? Because this is all that's going on in my mind about that.
Yeah.
Right.
So it really becomes quite this time saver, honestly. And it's like becomes shorthand of what, could have been. I think we would have eventually gotten there. We certainly did before we knew the Enneagram anyway. Growth happened. But we didn't have the same verbiage for it. And so it's like we got there, but we took the long route.
Yeah.
Whereas now it feels like it gives us a little bit more shorthand to understand what's all going on. And I know I've referenced for myself, even with some of this whole coronavirus situation, I can get in an anxiety space and like start freaking out about the future. And he is able to now know, like, okay, are you just like too far out there? Like, come back to now. And it's such a helpful like reminder to like, okay, I can't control a year out, but I can do right now. Just come right here.
Yeah.
And it's so helpful to bring peace for me, when it'd be so easy to just spin out, as an example.
Yeah. I'm thinking how many years of could have been saved. Like, if you had just known the shorthand in the beginning, that would have been so great.
Seriously. It's so true. It's why I like my kids being interested and learning, because that's my hope, right? We always want our kids to be able to go farther than we did. And so, for example, our oldest is a 2, and he is so relational, and he's 18. And so for him to learn, like, hey, you got to be careful because your penchant is to need to be needed. Right. And he acknowledges that he's the one that sees that.
Yeah.
And so like talk about the ability to be super codependent if you're not aware.
Yeah.
And especially in a teenage like time of life.
Yeah.
So it's been such a huge thing. And whether your kid is a 2 or not, I think that's obviously a penchant, but to have more words for how to like talk about it. And let's be sure that we're, asking, is this mine to do? Is a good question for our 2s. But I think it's also a good question if they're in that, like, we can't save everyone. Like, especially in that, like, your love is not going to save that person. So let's like pull back. But for him, I think it's been such a helpful thing for him to know about himself. And then he's been able to acknowledge some things and ways when he's, things are getting a little too intertwined. And then, when he can know how to pull back or, have better boundaries or whatever. So,
Yeah.
No, that's great.
Yeah, you mentioned having tools in your backpack or your tool belt earlier, and that's like so great to give our kids. That's one of the, like, just a knowledge of yourself and how you operate is probably one of the best tools we can give our kids for their tool belt.
Yes.
So,
Yep. And to me, I think if it's just qualities we see, whether they're this specific number or not, who cares when they're young? Like, but we can still help give them tools to where they're at. So, without having to put them into a like, oh, that means you're a this, and you can only be this. It's like, who cares? But hey, okay, you're a passionate person, and your passion is coming out very loud. And to other people, that feels angry. So I'm going to need you to pull back. And I know it's passion, and you get to be passionate, but realize that this is how it affects other people.
Yeah.
In light of that, is there a best age to determine these traits in our kids?
So I think we as parents certainly will recognize tendencies. I think some things are more obvious than others. So I think that we can speak to some of the tendencies, whatever number it falls into. I think we can start giving them helpful tools along the way, no matter what, at any age. But I think certainly that mid-teen, time to older teen, when they have a little more self-awareness. Tests are tough because it's so easy to answer how you want to be, rather
Right.
than how you actually are, which we adults have that trouble sometimes too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I did.
But certainly the younger we are, I think it's so much easier to answer the way the way that we wish we were, or that we'd
Yeah.
like to be, or that we think we are.
Mhm.
And so that's the danger to me. I still think the listening to what each type is, or reading a book, or talking with people, there's so much more life available those ways than just some test.
Mhm.
But there are some decent ones out there that at least can kind of give you like, oh, you should investigate these 3 numbers and see.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So at least kind of helps tear down, or certainly other people that know the Enneagram pretty well. But it's kind of depends on the kid. I think it depends on their maturity and where they're at. I'm sure younger, if they're really mature, might be able to glean some, but
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, you mentioned tools for helping them learn how to navigate life and their reactions, but I think it's also super helpful for us as their parents to know how to help guide them and train
yeah,
them, and to be able to speak into, say, one kid is a 2 and one kid is a 7. I mean, you're going to respond to them totally different,
Yeah.
in
100%.
whichever ways you're helping them. So I think that's good to know, because I think sometimes it's maybe an easy tendency is just you just parent your kids all the same way because that's how you parent. Well, that may not be the best scenario for each kid.
Yeah, or it's super easy to parent how you would have wanted to be then
Sure.
parented, or how you were, or how
Right.
ourselves, which is why I still think the best thing we can do first is learn ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because it's even given me verbiage to be able to, I'm going to say a cheesy thing, but humble myself when I am spinning out. Like, I'm sorry, this is what's going on with me right now. And that's where I came out of a reaction of fill in the blank. And so, can I have 10 minutes and then revisit this conversation,
Yeah.
or whatever? And I think even it being an example of knowing ourselves becomes a really good example for our kids, that's something that they too can do.
Yeah.
It's really good.
So, I have a question about resources. I mean, everything, well, 90% of what I know about Enneagram, I have learned from you, Nicole, either on your Instagram videos that you do, or just in personal conversations. But what would you suggest are the best resources, like to dive a little deeper or to get more knowledge for me? But also, is there something different for kids than adults, or
That's a good question.
Yeah. I don't know that there's not a lot of recommendation for kids to get into it yet.
yeah.
Just because they're the self-awareness and they're still growing, right? Like, they're
Right.
hormonal and trying stuff out, and feelings come a dime a dozen. And so it's a little early for them to like dive in, probably the deep end,
Yeah.
again, when they're still trying to figure out sort of who they are, how they think, or differentiate that between them and their friends, or whatever. But for us, I mean, my first go-to book is always The Road Back to You, and by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. I think it's a great first step, just sort of an introduction, a little deeper than what we talked about today. And just has such a great heart and spirit about it, about how, we're all made so individually too, and to be able to have empathy and celebrate those differences.
Mm-hmm.
Suzanne wrote another book after that called The Path Between Us, and that's really good about interrelational between the different numbers, and sometimes the struggles that will happen depending on your type, and then who you're interacting with, and some of those things, which was cool and really good. There's also Suzanne Stabile has a great podcast that I really like to listen to, and she's such a great teacher. So it's called The Enneagram Journey.
Great.
And I love that one too. There is an app called Ennea app And I think it's a couple dollars for the full thing, which I like just on my phone as information, but I don't find it to be as in depth. It feels a little one note for me sometimes. So, it's not the only, but it's just kind of a fun in your hand resource too. So,
Sure. Awesome. Thank you.
yeah.
Nicole, do you have any ending thoughts in overview of everything that you've mentioned? We've talked about a lot of things. If no one heard anything else but this parting thought, what would you share about the Enneagram?
Oof, no pressure. Well, I would say that the Enneagram is just one tool, that we are all three-dimensional people, and we've all had a lot of different life experiences that we bring into all of that. So even if you identify as a 9 or a 1 or whatever, you are still your own person. That is not a limiting thing. It's I can't remember if I described this or not, but to me, the Enneagram is not a box that we're putting ourselves into, but instead illuminating the box that we've been standing in, and how tools on how we can get out of that box.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's very freeing.
Yeah.
And in my mind, this is not just like, okay, here's your homework, here's your work to do. For me, it's come very naturally, whether it's experiencing a little more grace for myself right where I'm at in the moment that I am, and being able to kind of laugh at myself when I see it, or just, like have a little empathy. But then also being able to see really kindly moments that I go, oh my God, I'm doing it again. Like, stop. And being able to start to see those things, and they come very naturally. I really feel like the most healthy and real growth ways come just it's allowing the process and allowing it to come to you, rather than like forcing some behavior modification to be better. Dang it. It doesn't really work. It's just not helpful. It just adds more stress, and nobody needs that. So, and again, with other people, it's not a weapon to use against them. It's a way to encourage and love others. Obviously to be better, but also to just understand that we all see the world so differently. So, and that there's such beautiful gifts in that. So,
Oh, absolutely. That's really good. Keli, do you have any further questions or thoughts you'd like to add?
I don't have anything. I mean, this has been so wonderful to just get the overview. Nicole and I are actually talking about her coming on to my podcast with my co-host, another Nicole, to kind of talk more in depth, just as far as how our podcast is primarily about families and the inner workings of families and things like that. So we really want to pick her brain and go a little bit deeper as far as how all of this applies in interpersonal relationships and families. So that's probably where I will really ask all my probing questions. But this, so good for me to have just the overview and the explanations on a different level. So enlightening. I love it. It just gets my wheels turning. So thank you for that, Nicole.
Absolutely. I love it.
Yes, it's been fantastic. Thank you, Nicole. If people want to learn more, you have on I think Keli mentioned it, but on your Instagram, you have some IG videos where you go further in detail on each number, correct?
I do. Yep.
And where would people find that?
So if you just go to my Instagram account, it's called Nicole with 3, and I believe it's public now. And so if you on my page go to the IG videos tab, you'll see all of them that I've made, and I kind of made a how I came into things, and then I go through each type, and each one of them are about 10 minutes long.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I'll make sure and we'll add that in the show notes. And that is Nicole with 3, the number 3, not spelled out.
That's correct. Yep. Thank you.
And I have never had a co-host before, so it was super fun having Keli on the show with me today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, Kel, would you take you kind of just mentioned it, but would you mention what your podcast is called? How do people find you? Where do you want them to look?
Sure. So the podcast is called Everything's Not Fine. And you can find it pretty much everywhere you would listen to a podcast. And we are on Instagram as Everything's Not Fine Pod. And I personally am on Instagram under Improperly Forward. So those three places all share information back and forth. But those are primarily, and we just, like I said, we're just a podcast talking about everything's not fine. Doesn't necessarily sound very encouraging, but it's meant to be encouraging in that life happens, and it's not always, just a picture perfect life. Sometimes everything's not fine, and that's okay.
But you guys have a way of really putting humor on it and adding a fun spin and just being raw and real. And you have a great chemistry together with Nicole Gonzalez. And so it's fun.
Thank you. It's been quite the adventure and quite a lot of self-discovery and fun. So I appreciate that you see that. Thank you for validating me.
I really just want to extend a bridge to you.
Yes, that's right.
I will cross the bridge. I will not set it on fire.
Cool, thank you. I appreciate that.
Awesome. My work here is done, guys.
Oh, this is awesome. All right. Well, I'm not even sure what else to say after that.
It's the perfect ending.
That's right.